M. The Media Project. Imagine a vibrant region that embraces innovative technology and systems, allowing individuals and businesses to grow and thrive within the natural and cultural lifestyle of Vermont. Imagine the Black River Innovation Campus. Our community includes business and technology programming, co-working and technology tools, and other exciting experiences that are quickly creating an outsized impact to our little corner of northern New England here in Springfield, Vermont. PC Mag rates Springfield, Vermont number 8 for the best work-from-home cities in the U.S. Join us in Vermont. Begin your journey at bricvt.org.
Well, so 2024, what a rush. It was quite a busy year. Lots going on. Lots of anxiety was in the air in 2024.
Uncertainty.
Yeah.
Uncertainty was definitely the word. It was, I've heard a number of people say, and I would agree with them. Like personally, I had the kind of year that wasn't, it's not a question of good and bad. It was a question of lots of head scratching. It's a head scratching kind of say, like, it wasn't bad, but the business could have done a little better, or it didn't meet let's just call it what it is. It's a year that didn't meet expectations.
Yeah. Well, I think one thing did meet expectations or even surpassed it. I think working with you guys has been awesome. I think the Innova802 program has been a success. I think that segment definitely took its own shape, and we had some awesome guests. Doug Merrill jumps into mind. I can't wait to get him back on and watch what's going on with the gallium nitride collaborative. As you mentioned, the Verso Lab, the first podcast we did talking about that with Kendall, definitely right up our alley and really important work. Yeah.
Kendall Fortney was a great episode. The episode we did, I know we pieced it together with bits and pieces of an interview I did with Monique, State Rep Monique Priestley, but the data privacy one was good for us too, because I think that was really the first policy oriented show that we did. So that was a great show.
That would be interesting to do more of, actually, especially with Adam Laughlin coming in at VTTA and policy being such a big focus of their organization. I think we do well.
So as we talk about 2024, gents, I just want to say it set up us for, one hell of from a current event standpoint in rural tech and rural tech in Vermont, it certainly set us up for one hell of a ride starting, because let's, the listeners will know we don't want to do this, like predict the future at the same time everybody else does. So it's actually February. And now we want to talk about, the rest of the world. So our look at the past here is really about, 2024 plus one month. But, for 2025, I have to say, like, with each passing day, things are evolving like rapidly enough where the news is new almost virtually daily. In tech specifically, and democracy and for a whole bunch of other things that affect tech. Which, is pretty wild.
Between policy, funding, technology that's actually hitting the markets.
Yeah. And well, you spoke to one just a moment ago. Now, here we are. It's the 3rd of February when we're recording, for listeners' reference. A week ago, I had the pleasure of being a part of a panel of 4 for a press conference where said Vermont State Rep Monique Priestley announced a renewed effort here in the state of Vermont to attempt to pass a data privacy bill or bills, separated out. One thing, because I'm close with the state rep, that was somewhat unanticipated last year was the extent at a national level that the pushback on that data privacy, the original iteration of the data privacy bill was. I had the opportunity to sort of speak to what it would really mean for small business and a bit, at least for a few lines, on the personal experience of what it's like to deal with ad tech, various forms of ad tech, when you are smaller, do not have millions of dollars, and don't have the kind of access, even with a little bit of digital media savvy. You got to have the money to be able to adequately overcome some of the techniques that are currently been in use for the last 10 years or so. The data privacy thing is going to be interesting this year. They're splitting that bill into various bills. All right. So there's a lot of strategy, in short, that's going into attempting to get something passed. And I'm just honored that here in our home state, in Vermont, that there's a really, not only a renewed effort, and it's not, by far State Rep Priestley alone. We're talking a lot of people both in Vermont and in other states that are really pushing for us to lead the way. And I think that's really special.
The significant impetus for it, ad tech is one piece of it, but how many tens, hundreds of millions of people have had their credit information released into the dark web, or their medical information, another million victims recently with their medical information out there. 75% of our schools have had their data leaked through a hack of a vendor serving our schools. And to your point, even if you have money, right? Hospitals have money. Dealerships, car dealerships are some of the wealthier and more prosperous small businesses in this country. But ADP is a major vendor that kind of has them stuck in their bind, and ADP was hacked. And that's right. A whole different dynamic, as well as the awareness that, those dealerships, they don't actually own that information. Yeah, sure, maybe they're not the ones liable because it's ADP that technically has the liability, but they're the ones with the customers whose trust is violated. They're the ones that face the customers and think about how they're going to run their business and build trust and rapport again. And that's where the teeth come in. And, I know we don't want to get too, opinionated on certain things, but I've watched data privacy for a long time. I watched GDPR, I watched the Rhode Island legislation, and, it's not just the opposition. It's that opposition knows what it's doing. It's well-funded and it's very strategic. So it wasn't.
Well, they've hired the same lobbying firm that dealt with big tobacco in trying to make the argument for big tobacco. So we're talking about deep pockets that are behind this. We saw a lot of name brand major international and national retailers fight back against Vermont last year. By the way, I want to say, it's just as an example, one of the biggest things that they're fighting against is a small business or an individual having the capability, if they allege that a company or companies mishandled their data, my personal data, my financial data, or my health data. If I believe somebody did, I have the right to sue. And they said that's not fair. In this country, it should be fair. It might be hard. No one's saying, "Oh, we're going to give you some free money so you can sue a big company." We're simply saying you should have the right. If you suspect somebody is mismanaged and they will not disclose to you how they've done it, you can sue to get that information. You can sue if you were harmed by the alleged mismanagement of your information. And they're saying, well, that's not fair. Come on.
Which, by the way, is no different than, say, a stockholder having rights over the stock that is in the possession of other companies who have fiduciary responsibility. So in other words, if you're a wealth holder and the data that we're talking about in that context is a piece of security, an equity, a debt contract, any kind of financial instrument, these rules exist, and they're sort of like the de facto standard. And yet, as we develop data in all kinds of other forms and leverage data in other forms, and we avoid putting those wrappers on that data, we're just, we're watching the avoidance of that fiduciary responsibility for our data. And it's really a shirking of responsibility, because this country is based on the very first statement, we the people.
Right.
right?
And that's important.
Yeah, absolutely.
And you know, do you want your car collecting driving behavior data? And a company has the ability to sell that valuable information to insurers? Do you want the same thing to happen with your medical information to be sold to either doctors, hospitals, systems, or, you know, worse, you know, insurers?
Maybe we do. This is how we may pay for these systems that we need to be serving the collective good, but we deserve to know how, and we deserve to be able to track down the breadcrumbs to then hold that system accountable if it is not doing it responsibly.
Right.
That's an exciting thing too. I don't want to pin that all as a negative thing. I think it's really important for people to actually realize that, yes, there's very powerful pushback against this. There's a reason for that. This is valuable to you and I. This is the way I've been putting it to folks, like Alaska has oil. Vermont has data. Vermont has a unique place of leadership in environmental sustainability, in leading the, you know, per capita B Corps, employee ownership. All of these models represent thought leadership in how we take care of each other. And that basis puts us in a very strong position, not to mention some of the international insurance business that we have here that really undercuts the traditional commercial for-profit insurance. We run some of the biggest pools of nonprofit insurance programs in the world, and that can be fed by this data. So this data concept, this Data Privacy Act in combination with the thought leadership in Vermont can make tech Vermont's oil. And it already is, 25% of the Vermont economy is based on tech and tech enablement. This just continues that progress forward.
And as long as the counter to companies like that having vast amounts of information to people, we make it easier, not harder, as, you know, just one of the many balancing acts for people to be able to take action against companies that would mishandle that information, or seek, it's not retribution, but we can't live in a society where people are kicked out of insurance because they're sick or because they drive really bad. You know, otherwise, then nobody should have insurance, because just because drivers drive bad, make them pay more, right? No one's saying you can't make money off these people. We're simply saying you need to give A, knowledge ahead of time to people of how you're using their information, and everybody has to agree to that. And B, when you screw up, people should be able to sue you in plain English. And I don't think that's unreasonable. One of the points I made last week in my little speech was the only type of company, right? We need to decide what kind of a business community we want to be in Vermont, and ergo the country. And the only companies, you know, that want to not let people have those rights are companies whose, you know, internal currency has to do with the mismanagement of somebody's information. Why else would you want it?
Wait on the misuse of that information.
Yeah. Well, tell us a better story for 2025 and not all this doom and gloom.
Well, no, I think let's come back to that piece, though, because the bill is coming back. And at the end of the day, the goal of this is how can we have a fair, accountable, and informed consent around our data? Yeah. I'd say that's a hopeful story. Let's just come back.
Okay. I like that.
Actually.
I mean, the other tenet that Monique has is sovereignty, right? Yeah, self-sovereignty over data, right? So, yeah. So just to kind of correct the key point in vernacular is it's not letting them have the data and make money on it. It's allowing them, permitting them access to which can be revoked, right? Right. If I go to a doctor, they don't need access to my medical records 24/7. They need access to my medical records while I'm there being seen. And the rest of the time, nobody needs access to my medical records. But by the way, if I go to one doctor for one thing and I go see a chiropractor somewhere else and I go see my primary practitioner somewhere else, I should have a universal place where I have access to that data. And each one of those practitioners should have access to what I give them access to when they need it and no more. And if they want to go make more money on that data or do some research with that data, that's fine. As long as they ask me, right? As long as they work through some trusted institutions that I say, okay, you know, I trust the way this institution is going to handle that data, de-identify that data, make it available for these purposes. I expect it to be used for these purposes and these purposes only. I expect the intention to be this common good. And by the way, there's the checks and balances and the accounting and auditing of that, where a year later I can see, oh, they did what they said they were going to do. They'd been working what they said they were going to do. Or, hey, that kind of went a little sideways. There's some unexpected consequences here. Maybe I don't want them to handle it, or maybe I need them to show me how they're going to do it better in the next round. And that self-sovereignty over our data, it's not just about us having to understand it all and make those decisions, but it's about having the grails for those who want to learn and understand it to do so, and those who don't to be able to rely on trusted institutions that they can count on to have their best interests at heart, but also still hold them accountable. It's not a black box. You just throw it in and go, hope you're doing good things,
Speaking of segues on big tech, one of the things I wanted to say about 2025 was it'll be interesting to see how big tech affects democracy. And here we are. It's February 3rd. And over the weekend, our new Treasury Secretary at the federal level, Besant, has allowed, so essentially right now, all of our financial data, anybody who has ever done business with the federal government, and this would include everybody on Social Security, everybody who's ever received any federal subsidy of any kind, anyone who's ever been a part of federal grants for an organization, they now have all this financial data. And when I say they, I mean Elon Musk and his company he's not an elected official, and he's not officially an employee of the federal government. But our Treasury Secretary, under orders assuming of the President of the United States, has given all of the access to that information, the Treasury's payout information, to Elon Musk. And so is this the ultimate, besides a bad effect on democracy, because this is just not democratic. He's not an elected official. He has no business being able to access all that information. But now that gives him a tremendous amount of power, even over Congress, since Congress, under our Constitution, is the only entity of its kind that actually says how money is allocated through legislation, right? So we can talk about the consequences specific to the Constitution and the constitutionality of this. But first, this doesn't bode well for discussion on how big tech is going to affect democracy in 2025. But isn't this like the ultimate hack?
Yeah.
Someone just opens the door.
I mean, most hacks are social internet anyways.
True. Sounds like an insult.
Close the door.
Yeah. So both the Times and the Wall Street Journal have in the last 48 hours have reported that this essentially was done. So how this was done was a hack by about a half dozen, 6 to 8, mostly young employees of Elon Musk. So this was a if you do this, we aren't going to stand in your way. And then a bunch of computer science engineers were used to hack into the Treasury, and no one at the Treasury, the normal stops weren't in place for a period of time such that they were able to do that, right? So somebody would have had to give the order for that. But it's just, my problem with it is it's fundamental assault on democracy, right? Our Constitution says that Congress and only Congress can allocate money. The President of the United States cannot, despite all these presidential signing statements, executive orders, what have you, under our Constitution, the President of the United States does not have the right to dole out funds. And the reason why that was created was, because we don't want one guy or one gal to have that kind of power. This makes money coming out of Congress complicated, right? Because you have to go through the legislative process, or at least it's supposed to be complicated. But they did that on purpose, right? They want people to fight over how the money is going to be allocated, essentially. Fight's not a good word, but you know what I mean.
Compromise. We walk it back a little bit.
They're supposed to, by and large, there's always going to be a compromise, and that people, it's going to be allocated fairly. Maybe not always well, but it will be fair in that at least you had the remote, even however remote chance that there was discussion about how the money is going to be spent. And as we know, he said it, throughout the campaign, this is, our current president doesn't want it this way. He wants to be able to unilaterally say, I want money spent over here. I want to stop stuff over here. And the week before, at the beginning of the week, of course, he tried by executive order to stop all federal payments. I felt the pain of this myself for a federal earmark that I'm waiting on a project that I've been waiting since April because continuing resolutions delayed it before this person became president and now is saying we can't have it. And it's not Vermont. It's one of our neighboring states. That was found to be unconstitutional. There've been hundreds of lawsuits just on that one executive order, from what I understand. Anyways, wild stuff. Any other thoughts?
I'll bring a thought. If we're looking for a little bit of hope in 2025, my word for that is collaboration and an interesting culture shift, I believe, that I've been really seeing over the past year. Although I know that it has been growing for longer than that, probably the last 5 or 6 years, of organizations and communities, especially in rural areas, actually, opening up and expressing an interest in collaborating with their neighbors more, collaborating on a regional level, collaborating not just on a state level, but interstate level. And this is something that it's become something of a special interest project for me over the last 8 months or so, especially in the entrepreneurial space. And that was where this started, this realization that there was this shifting culture element before the election. But then I started noticing it in other spheres. I started talking with folks throughout the states and noticed that the same types of conversations around this were cropping up in the nonprofit sector. It was cropping up in government departments, cropping up even in emergency services with fire departments, with hospitals and ambulances, EMS. But the idea that we've been working in silos for a long time and really thinking very, very concise geographic areas, our town, our city, our locale, but realizing that maybe there's another way, that if we're able to share resources, share experience, share data, coming back to our earlier conversation, across regions and find ways to collaborate that way, maybe we don't need to have 5 organizations that each develop the same document or process for their organization. If someone's done that well, hey, let's share that in the community. If you've got one person in an ecosystem over in Rutland, Vermont, and they're looking for a resource or an opportunity or financing, what if we could connect them with the folks in Brattleboro, the folks in Chittenden County, the folks in Montpelier, and make that type of collaboration the default? Because I think it hasn't been the default in our region for a very long time. And folks are happy to collaborate even. You can bring people to the table across different regions and they'll work together. But it hasn't been the default. And it is something that I think is changing with a change in leadership and a change in the expectations. I think this is stemming from 2 things that I'm really hopeful for. One was a disaster, the pandemic, that broke all expectations. It opened up people's minds to the possibility of connecting remotely. And it meant that resources were in a pinch and everyone was responding in an experience of high uncertainty. Again, coming back to that forced people to collaborate across these borders. So it broke old expectations.
We went to the streets to hear what the people have been saying about the new 6-episode podcast called WLVII Channel 58, brought to you by the comedy team at The Mental Suppository. Just listen to these unscripted and candid responses.
I'm Channel 58 roving reporter Jeff Canasta, here on the bustling streets of Peru, Massachusetts. Excuse me, sir. What do you think of WLVII Channel 58?
Uh-huh. Who are you? Get out of my way, twerp.
Excuse me, sir. What do you think of WLVII Channel 58?
I think Channel 58 should be dragged out into the street and shot!
You heard it here first, folks. The general public is stark raving mad at WLVIII Channel 58. Sir, can I get your opinion on Channel 58?
You want my honest opinion on Channel 58? I'll give you my opinion in the form of two fists.
Excuse me, ma'am. What's your honest opinion of WLVIII Channel 58?
Ah! Get away from me! Get away from me!
Ah! Pepper spray? Really? Ah! Ah! Fine! I guess people are still making up their minds about this damn show! I don't care! I'm not getting paid enough to get sprayed with pepper spray! Damn it! Ah! She got me again! Ah!
Well, the reviews are stellar for The Mental Suppository presents WLVIII Channel 58, a new 6-episode podcast event premiering January 1st. A whole new dimension in watching television, because it's audio. Coming January 1st, wherever the hell you listen to podcasts.
And then in the last few years, I've also been noticing a turnover in terms of the leadership in many organizations. A lot of new folks coming into positions of leadership and decision making that are bringing that concept of collaboration, asking, hey, why don't we collaborate with our comrades in the next town over, with our folks who have the same goals or even similar goals? And maybe they're developing similar tools. Maybe they've seen this before. Maybe they have an idea for how we could solve this problem that's happening in our town, in our part of the state, in our part of New England. And so I think that's going to be my watchword for hope in 2025 is collaboration, because I think that's a change. And I think that's happening across a lot more than just tech.
And Vermont's specific, Vermont, in my experience in my brief time living here, seems to take the whole like town autonomy thing just a little too far. And what you're describing is folks saying, okay, that's cool for certain things, but there's other things where like, to take from technology based business, we need to scale in a different way, right? That if we actually truly collaborate together, it's funny because it's in the political space and in the state, at the state level, it's our Republican governor, Phil Scott, who's saying, as an example, we can't have all these independent school districts anymore. One way to make this better would be to regionalize, right? Which is really the reason why I think this is good for us and that I think it'll work is you can still have the same. We have 251 cities and towns. Most of them, the average town in the state has what? As an aggregate average is probably 500 or 600 people, right? And we have, I think we have either 71 or 91 school districts, right? That means we have 91 superintendents in a state that's fairly poor. So like, why wouldn't we have 9 or 12 or 14, if it's by county or whatever it is? His proposal, I think, is either 9 or something like that, somewhere in that neighborhood, regional districts where you're not so top heavy, right? Let's put the money into faculty. Let's put the money into the students. Let's not put the money into superintendents. Even superintendents I've talked to. So it's just another example of an iteration of what you're saying, where it's like, hey, let's rearrange. Let's look at the from a pragmatic and from a philosophical standpoint, like what would really truly work best, right? But all of this is really exemplified by collaboration. I like that word too. I think that's great.
And it doesn't
Right.
fast, to your point, like we're seeing these things now, but 2016, there was sort of an extreme reaction. The resist movement kind of happened, and what I saw at that time was the beginnings of this collaboration, this concept of folks. I started meeting folks at MIT and Harvard. I started meeting people across the country, and it really, I think the collaboration piece started there because, sure, it's great to, get that impact in the news, but at the end of the day, it's the day-to-day work that makes these things happen. And it was 2017 and 18 when I was showing up with a bunch of other folks working on things like blockchain legislation in Vermont, working on fiber to the home. The communications union districts were formed then that are now finally getting the fiber to the homes. There was something that hasn't been used yet, but it's called a READY district, a Rural Economic Development Infrastructure District. And that concept could be applied to a number of different things. One of them that I've always thought about is education. Vermont actually has one of the better and more stringent and comprehensive homeschool programs. I've always been, as a high school dropout that was frustrated with our education system, very aware of the industrial nature of our educational model. But there's also been some really powerful things that I really appreciate having learned in Vermont schools that aren't other places. I remember my school going through, a mock debate week where it wasn't just like, oh, pick a topic and have some kids argue about it. I remember sitting around with a bunch of kids, like picking through legislation, right? Picking through the nitty gritty line by line of how do we word this thing to have the effect that we intend. And that was very powerful, but that's not what every kid gets in education today. And
most don't even get civics at all, let alone real, pragmatic on the weed stuff like that.
And so, I think that, this idea of, technology can empower and enable us to individualize education while still making it a community adventure. We don't need to be paying attention to town border lines that are just made up lines on a map when we're thinking about how we plan the education of an individual student or a group of students. And so, I don't know all the details of, Governor Scott's plan, but I do know that taking that more overarching, holistic look at how we're doing things, while also taking into consideration how we can use technology to share resources, to make the right teacher available to the right student at the right time, and to get the right students connected with each other and not all at the same age level, across age levels in our school system. I've seen a lot of success in Vermont schools where they do combined classes, where you have third and fourth grade in the same class or fourth and fifth grade in the same class. And so they have a bigger class, but they also have a couple teachers that are able to focus where they're good at and work with those kids focused on that thing at that time. And it creates a much more dynamic experience that also creates the framework, right? So 7-8 years ago, some of those kids are in college now. Some of those college kids are in careers now. And so we're starting to see, like you said, that turnover of sort of the old guard in leadership, where some of them maybe needed to go. Others were just hanging on because they were hoping for good leadership to take their place, right? And I think that's a great example in the VTTA where, Jeff did an amazing job bringing that organization together and creating that community and that camaraderie across the state and really focusing on the whole state as much as he could. And, the amount of time that he took with the board to provide that runway for them to find the right person, to find someone that's really going to continue that mission and that journey. That's really exciting. And I think that's going to be really powerful for Vermont. And I think that it's all about the fact that we do this on an open platform and other people in other states and other communities are eager to get on board. People want to work together. They want to succeed together. They want to see their neighbors succeed. And it's more and more becoming about how do we build together and how do we protect against what we know is extractive, what we know technology can do, what we know bureaucracy can do, and how do we change that? How do we turn that on its head and make it work for us?
Right. And I think
go ahead, Will.
I was going to say, I think there's something in that you brought up as well, the school consolidation, because I know there was a lot of pushback in Vermont of people not wanting to lose their local town school. And so consolidation is actually a word that in these conversations I've been trying to intentionally avoid and focus on collaboration. And I think it's really where you need to start is what I believe, because I think if perhaps towns and communities had been building bridges beforehand, been working together, been perhaps even sharing resources across schools, for example. Just to take that as an example, I'm not an expert on schools or school policy in that way, but I wonder if you had started perhaps by building relationships between those schools, between the towns, and having those schools sharing resources, maybe even sharing kids between schools for different programs. That might have built up a level of trust and understanding, and then you could move on to recognizing, hey, is there a better way that we could serve all of these towns' kids because we're all in this together and we're sharing these resources and these programs? And then from there, maybe you can find ways to be additive to each other's work and not duplicative. Or perhaps to the furthest extent of that, to be additive and not necessarily even competing for the same resources. If there are grants or state funding, hey, what if our 3 organizations could send a collaborative application to that grant and have a much higher chance of getting it because we can show we have the expertise in all of these fields that neither of us is able to bring individually.
Yeah, speaking of, I'm always looking for the key segues of this idea of protectionism and the opposite of collaboration, right? I sense that part of it's created all the consternation in big tech circles right now regarding the AI solution that came out of China last week is that essentially for the last couple of years, all this money that's been raised for large language solutions, right? All of this stuff is exciting, right? But it hasn't created versus, the amount of money that's been raised, right? If I'm Sam Altman or I'm any one of these other guys, I'm freaking out because man, I have raised a lot of money, right? And these are fun tools, but they're not changing the world exactly yet. I'm kind of throwing a different, sort of perspective on all of that's gone on, right? So maybe one of you can, for our listeners that have been asleep for the last 10 days, talk a little bit about, I keep forgetting the damn name of the company. It's Deepfake. Seek. I don't know why I want to put it. Yeah, it's not Deepfake.
And here's the thing too, though, is the software is open source, but what's not open source is the hardware that's used for the inference and training.
Right. And we don't know how they might monetize that, right? Because there's a bunch of different establishments. Right. They could read their own.
What's not open source is the actual data set being used regularly and how that's being guardrailed, right? So, if you, even ChatGPT, if you start asking it political questions, it's going to start to defer and avoid. If you do that with DeepSeek and start asking about, Xi Jinping, say his name wrong, but any leadership in China, it's gonna avoid and defer.
And it may report you. Yeah.
Comment on it. And it's on their hardware, it's on their equipment, it may report you. Now, you can run these open source models on your own hardware. And that's something that really can, that's where we can localize and regionalize access to these tools. Because the concern is that they go, we can't figure out how to monetize it, let's shut it down. And then what are we doing, right? And so because it's open source, we do have that freedom to deploy it on our own hardware. It's just that has a cost, that has an expense. And so, I think that's the natural human collaboration that's been evolving, as well as the ability to collaborate with technology, the ability to iterate on things. It's been frankly game-changing for me. This technology has allowed me to process things at a much more rapid pace, just thinking about concepts and exploring concepts and ideas, learning things much more rapidly, finding things much more effectively online. The ability to take old things that I wrote years ago that I got, half a page, and I can break it down into something that is much more comprehensively thought out with better grammar and punctuation and all that. And it's not different than me being able to speak an idea to somebody. It's formatting it for me. It's extrapolating on things for me. And that is accelerating. And now the only reason we haven't seen huge game changes is because people are resistant to this stuff. right? People are resistant to technology. Like you said, well, they're resistant to this concept of consolidation, but that doesn't mean closing schools. That means closing the loop on the collaboration. That means knowing what's going on across the area, across schools, knowing that we have this technology and connectivity to have one teacher across the state teaching 50 kids in 13 different districts.
Chris, well, I think you're speaking to, in the first place, people have to understand that the act of consolidation or the act of redesigning something is an act. It's a verb, and you need to participate in it to determine what it is. So, it doesn't have to be designed to hurt you. It needs to be designed to help. So,
but it needs your help to do that.
But it needs your help too. You need to be active in that. So I look at the in relation to the AI now, not the schools again. There is some fear from a workforce development standpoint that, and it's true. There are a lot of big companies. You can see that they're just chomping at the bit and they want to fire everybody and have this do the work. The issue is, for all the billions of dollars in a relatively short period of time, keeping in mind, I'm aware that, that these large language models weren't completely thought of and designed initially and placed in the market just in the last 24 to 36 months, right? There's more than a decade's worth of real work that was done. And then in the last 2 years, you're at the end of this iteration where, like, okay, now we've got something that we can at least put out in the market, even if it's crude, and it's very quickly, learning, right? It's doing what it needs to do. So I get that, like, at some point in time, this gets really tasty. I'm just saying that right now, and there's a variety of ways that this is handy, even to the three of us, sitting here talking, right? And we've been using these bots in a way that are exactly what Dominic Endicott and I have been talking about, right? Creating the bionic worker. Take all the mundane, especially research-oriented, listing, the mundane work out of my day, so I can just do the stuff that humans were meant to do, which is more strategic, purely creative, making stuff, what have you. The issue is, are some players going to not want to do that? Are they just going to use it to get rid of a bunch of people and not worry what happens on the back end of that? Sure, because we've always used technology in our capitalism for that. But in this, I'm turning this into an opportunity. You see, we have an opportunity. First of all, DeepSeek taught us that with a fraction of that investment money, we didn't need the billions of dollars, right? Not really, which puts more pressure on domestic companies that have raised all that money.
That is built on those billions of dollars. That's the challenge with open source. Those billions of dollars created the open source that allowed DeepSeek to use it to do what it did.
It's like not diluting funding at the beginning that gets you there.
Okay.
Here's the thing. When it comes to investment, whatever you think is in the news is not what the reality is in the market, right? So Sam Altman is not worried right now because right now he has a huge opportunity to bring more investors into his company, right? When the price of the stock goes down, that's when the wealthy buy. So DeepSeek, as much as he might portray, or somebody might portray, Meta might portray that somehow this is bad news, the stock market tank, what everyone has to remember is every time there's bad news for the stock market, that's good news for wealth holders. Whenever there's good news for the stock market, that's just bait for retail investment, right? And so all this is the iterative cycle of open source eating commercial, the wealth holders really knowing how to handle that. They anticipated this. It wasn't unexpected. Somebody was going to use the existing open source technology to build the next generation faster, better, cheaper.
Yeah.
And they're ready for it. And they're going to bring in a whole new wave of investors, and they're going to make the next iteration of their commercialization of that tech. And that's going to be the key. And these tariffs that are coming around, that's going to be a factor because they're going to be here stateside putting those products and services on the market.
Well, yeah, then we got the tariffs, right? There's just so much happening so fast.
Which I don't know.
And by the way, to be clear, I'm very supportive of the idea that that DeepSeek exists and that it was put out into the marketplace. But I'm also personally, I think the jury is still out on whether or not we've wasted a lot of money being put into things that will be a waste of money, I'll say, if the primary way the big business leaders of our country utilize it, I'm talking about various forms of iterations of future artificial intelligence, are simply used to put people on the street and not employ them anymore without there being like a transition. We have an opportunity to make capitalism smarter, right? If there's an overwhelmingly positive reason for society overall to let hundreds of thousands of people go, great. But can we just start doing that in an environment where we say, what are they going to do next? How do we better help them to do next, and not just put them out? Because now we're talking about putting numbers of people out in such a short period of time. We're already living in an unstable country, right? Let's be honest. All of the advancements we're making with technology, they are not accessible. They are not making the lives better for the majority of the population. They're making, if it's not the tech that's making those people's lives worse, bad policy is making their lives worse, right? And so we've got to think like there's always a tipping point in every society, in every country, where you can't just say, well, things, eventually it gets better, right? People get tired of hearing that and they start taking matters into their own hands. I'm not saying, that I'm a proponent of that, but it happens. It's just what happens. So why would we do that, right? We have to design things better. We have an opportunity to do that here in 2025.
Going back to the topic of schools, I think it would probably be worth bringing in someone with a little bit of expertise in that. Maybe someone who experienced that consolidation effort.
Sure.
Could tell.
And maybe even has a perspective on how technology could be implemented in ways to enhance, maybe we do it through the lens of enhancing the governor's proposal.
Yeah, I mean, we need an embracement of technology and technology education in schools, not just using some fancy tech. Like literally, students, teachers need to learn how to use their Google calendars.
I mean, a smart approach, right?
Yeah, exactly. And to talk about access to average people, OpenAI just released their $200 a month AI right before DeepSeek launched. What do you think that does to the price? Why do you think they just launched their new tools into the
those are not the people I'm talking about. I'm talking about the 20% of people in any given mill town in the United States on the East Coast that doesn't even have any fucking internet. No matter how much we say these are valuable digital tools, we are creating more people for a year from now than there were last year who don't have computers and don't have access to the internet because they don't have stable housing and they can't pay all of their basic bills. That's not a problem of technology. That's a problem of a failing capitalist system that needs to be tweaked so that we're making more money and that more people are making more money. I'm not asking for communism. I'm asking for more capitalism, more accessible capitalism.
Corporeal capitalism, right? Everybody has value. Everybody has the ability to generate value of their, in their own right.
What my good friend Ray Carey, industrialist, born in Gardner, Massachusetts, and the benefactor who created the Carey Center for Democratic Capitalism at Rutgers University, called democratic capitalism. Right? Well, more widespread. Everything we've talked about on the show, in fact.
And are we being human? Are we taking care of each other as a human society?
I think that's the question. We'll just hit the nail on the head at the apex of this entire conversation, which is 2025 is a year where we're really going to define whether or not it's focused on the question of, is tech in service to more tech, or is tech in service to us?
And are we in service to each other as human beings?
That's really the core question, isn't it? Guys, it's been a pleasure to put this episode together. This is it's cool stuff.
Yeah, good stuff. Thank you, guys. Appreciate you. We have lots more work to do, lots of 2025 left, so I look forward to it.
Oh, yes, lots of work ahead.
We'll toss it easy right.
Find Innova802 on Apple Podcasts and Spotify, and subscribe to Interchain Live on YouTube for video podcasts. Innova802 is a collaboration of Interchain Live and M the Media Project.